There's a lot of value in understanding what intrinsically drives you as an individual. What is your purpose? What's your why?
The first time you hear the word I love you, it has a different feeling, but as the years go by, it is downregulated.
As people get older, happiness becomes more tightly tied to contentment.
Even more precious to you at that point.
Oh my gosh, I hope so.
I guarantee it. Hello, I'm Dr. William Morgan, president of Parker University, and today I have best-selling author Dr. Cassie Holmes, author of Happier Hour. So welcome to Parker.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you here. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, so I am what I sort of have become termed a professor of happiness. And so I'm a professor at UCLA, and I, based off of my research, which has looked at the role of time, how we think about and spend our time to enjoy greater happiness, that sort of satisfaction in our days and about our lives. Based off of the research, I've developed a course that I've been teaching to our MBAs and executive MBAs called Applying the Science of Happiness to Life Design. And based off of those learnings and the impact on my students, I then wrote the book so that a broader audience would get access to these empirically based insights for basically how do we invest our time to live lives that feel joyful, and so we can look back on our years without regret.
Boy, that is important. Now, we have a concept here about pursuing 20 more good years. As you age, there's people who say, we're really pursuing living to be 120 or even past that, but we want to have good years, quality years. I think that's what you talk about is it's not the number of years or the amount of time, it's the amount of good times.
Yes, absolutely. And in this research on time and happiness, actually a lot of folks are like, oh my gosh, time is a barrier to happiness because we don't have enough time. And we want more, not only in our days, but we sort of have this idea that just more is better, which isn't necessarily true. In my work, I've actually found that within our days, there's such thing as having too much discretionary time because we are driven to have a sense of purpose, which comes from investing ourselves, not just in the relationships in our lives, but in the work that we do that's really fulfilling. But also, it's not the quantity of time of having available, but as you said, it is the quality. And how do we enjoy and invest our time and think about our time so we get as much satisfaction as possible from the time that we're spending? And in my work, I have found that actually there's really a tremendous amount of happiness and extraordinary happiness that can come from ordinary experiences in the time that we're spending in our day-to-day. And there too, it's not about quantity of availability. And in fact, having something accessible to you every day can offset our ability to find joy in it because we get used to it. Hedonic adaptation makes us not even notice those things anymore. And so it's really about how do we spend our time intentionally paying attention to get the joy from the time that we're spending.
So we had another speaker this weekend, Michael Easter, who he wrote the book, The Comfort Crisis. So he identifies this too. So, but the idea that he would go on these wilderness experiences where he is basically cold, deprived, just kind of miserable, but it kind of pushes him. So when he comes back, it's like a renewal of those senses and appreciating things better. So I don't know how that plays into what you're doing to reestablish those things you become so familiar with. I think you used the example of I love you. The first time you hear the word I love you, it has a different feeling, but as the years go by, it kind of is downregulated.
And I will say that you don't have to have extreme experiences of deprivation to offset the effects of hedonic adaptation, that there are other ways of doing so, like counting your times left. Because just because something is an everyday experience now, it doesn't mean that it's going to continue to happen every day like it does now. And I shared the example of my weekly coffee dates with my daughter. And this is something that we've been doing since she was 4, as I'm on my way to drop her at her preschool wanting coffee. And so we turned what was something that was very routine into this ritual. And this coffee date is just each week a half hour where it's the two of us together. Don't worry, I do not have her drink caffeinated beverages. It's a hot chocolate for her. But recognizing that this is something that seems quite mundane, but counting how many times I will have left to do this and recognizing that when she's 12, she'll probably want to go to the coffee shop with her friends instead of me, and then she's going to go off to college. So something that seems very everyday and accessible is in fact not going to continue to happen every day. And so counting times left, being intentional, turning routines into rituals are ways to make sure that we do pay attention to this extraordinary happiness that is right there in the time that we're already spending.
So happiness and fulfillment. As we get older and we reflect on our lives, you have some ideas on that too.
Yeah. And I have looked at the role of age on what types of experiences produce the greatest amount of happiness, as well as even how we experience happiness. And what we found in our work is actually among young people, happiness is more tightly tied to excitement, this sort of high arousal, anticipation, and excited happiness. As people get older, happiness becomes more tightly tied to contentment and that peacefulness. Also looking at the happiness from extraordinary versus ordinary experiences among younger people, it is those extraordinary experiences like incredible vacations or going to the concert or that sort of fancy restaurant. As people get older, they gain increasing happiness from ordinary experiences, those simple shared moments with loved ones, noticing that sunset, the sort of nature, or those little treats. And what's really interesting is that we found that among older people, they experience as much happiness from ordinary experiences as from extraordinary experiences. But it's not about age per se. What it really is that as we get older, we tend to recognize that our time is in fact limited. It is precious. And with that recognition, it makes us pay more attention to the time that we're spending, such that we are more likely to savor and notice those wonderful joys right there in the time that we're spending. And so related to what you said before in terms of our lifespan, yes, the way we experience happiness might shift from excitement to calm, but it's not a lessening of how much happiness. It's the sort of shift in the quality of that happiness qualitatively, that it is experienced differently, but not less so.
You've probably seen some of the studies where they show people the happiness scale through life, where as kids they go up because it's pretty happy, and then you get to those little tough years and it kind of goes down a little bit, but then in the 60s and 70s, actually, it increases.
Yeah.
What accounts for that?
And part of that is what I'm talking about, this sort of recognizing life as, or time as precious, and seeing the joy that's right there in our ordinary moments and experiencing greater happiness as contentment, not just that anticipated excitement. Also, as we get older, we get better at regulating our negative emotions. So if you're thinking about your overall happiness as sort of pulling out the bad so that you're left with the good, as we get older, we are better at pulling out the bad. And in my work, I'm looking at how are we spending our time and choices around how we spend our time. We're also become more in tune with what are those activities that actually are sources of satisfaction and joy, and that clarity motivates us to spend time in those ways and therefore finding greater happiness.
And being somebody at the other side of that, because like you were talking about how many times left. Is that the term you used?
Yes.
So for me, I look back like you're saying, and one day it's going to end. I'm looking back, that ended 20 years ago, but it was replaced by something else. So, but also, speaking to you, those coffee dates, your daughter will still want to have those coffee dates when she's 35 and 40 years old, and they will be even more precious to you at that point.
Oh my gosh, I hope so.
I guarantee it. Well, as you establish that habit, it's because you're also establishing that habit in her. And I think you're going to find later on, you're going to have those magic moments that you're going to want to sneak out. That's what my son and I, we would go, hey, let's sneak out. and we go get pancakes on a Saturday morning so my wife could, have some time alone. But those memories now are still very, very strong with him and I, even these many years later.
Yeah. And it is so true. And another sort of point to your question around like, how is it that as we age, that impacts our sources of happiness and really our sort of intentionality and in how we spend our time. And what we've also found in our work is that when people take a broader perspective of their time, thinking more in terms of the years of their life rather than the hours of their day, we see that those folks enjoy greater happiness. Not only do they report feeling greater meaning in their lives, but they also report feeling less stress in their days and more joy in their days. And while it is related to age, so as people get older, they do start to think about their time more as the years of their life overall, rather than getting sort of so bogged down with the hours of getting through the day. One of the drivers for the reason taking this broader perspective of time is so effective is because it highlights what is important. So that we aren't just spending our time reacting to what seems urgent, but in fact, being very clear on what's important. And as people get older and taking that broader perspective of time in terms of their life overall, it's very clarifying of what is in fact important. And you're touching back to those times with your son. I'm sure also during those times when he was little and you're sneaking off for pancakes, you were probably very busy and stressed out at work. But as you're reflecting now, it was those pancake breakfasts that ultimately were important, and your continued relationship with your son is pulling out as one of those highlights.
It's kind of an investment for the future, and you draw the dividends later on as well. So what advice would you give to like a senior executive, CEO level, who's towards the end of their career, but they want to squeak out a few more good years in there to make sure it's satisfying and happy, and you go on into the remainder of your life with a good trajectory?
Yeah, and I actually, even before you're getting to those senior years within one's career, it is even a question of what's the business case for happiness? Why is it that I'm teaching happiness at a business school? And when you look at the research, you see that when people feel happier, it allows them to show up better in the work that they do and for those around them. So happy employees are more engaged, they're better performers, they're less likely to call in sick, they're less likely to leave the company or the organization. And so there is work that shows that by investing in the happiness of your team, of your employees, you see a positive outcome in terms of bottom line. So it's not just about investing in our own happiness. It's really about understanding what are those determinants of people's happiness so that, again, not only do we feel good in our days, but we are motivated to continue to do well and show up for those around us. There's a lot of value in understanding what intrinsically drives you as an individual. What is your purpose? What's your why? And ideally, that is also in line with if you're still within an organization or within a company that's in line with that. But it's so helpful to understand what drives us, what is our why, because it is clarifying of what are those projects that we say yes to and no to. It's a filter for how to spend our time most effectively and in a fulfilling way. But also it makes it so that the tasks of the work that aren't necessarily fun, but clearly have a role in achieving the outcome, feel less onerous. And in fact, some of those work activities is truly joyful because they are in line with the purpose of the work. And this is really important because if you look at the research of time tracking, you see that on average, the least happy part of people's days is work. And given that for the vast majority of working Americans, they're spending more than 50% of their waking lives working, you don't want it to be just time that you're moving through. You want it to be a source of fulfillment. So understanding the why of what drives you in the work that you do makes those hours more worthwhile. But also, there's a lot to be said both in and outside of work of the role of social connection. And that is finding friendship among the folks that you work with, and also recognizing the sort of interpersonal impact of the work that you're doing. So between those two things of understanding your why and having that drive your temporal investment in your career, but also looking at that role of connection, social connection, and how you can forge relationships and friendships as well as benefit other individuals in the work that you do. Those things together are significantly more likely to produce job satisfaction. And even if there's this idea of like, it's okay if I'm not happy at work, because if I'm happy at home, but job satisfaction is a big determinant of life satisfaction. And so if we can find satisfaction and fulfillment in our work, that carries out and carries over to feel satisfaction and fulfillment in our lives.
Well, that was great. So we've taken a few steps at Parker University towards that. Like the head of our HR, her title is not, head of HR, is basically, she's the vice president of cultural strategy. So that she's here to help, her job is to help our culture be one where people feel fulfilled and satisfied with their work, and hopefully become happy. We also choose our majors in a particular way. We have 34 majors here, but we have a Venn diagram. So it's one of them is there a good return on their investment? Is it also, there's a need for that job in society, but the other one is job satisfaction. So we want to make sure that all three of those line up. So if they all intersect, that's a major that we probably should look into. And so we carefully select those. There was a major we picked a few years ago, looked at very good return on investment, and it's fulfillment. They're going to get a job. They're going to get 100% employment, good pay, for return on investment. But the job satisfaction was, because essentially, I won't say the name of the profession, essentially they were giving poison to people who are dying. So it's kind of a sad job. So it's like we chose not to go with that major because that's kind of not in our mission either. So
yeah, and that's such a great example, because while I'm talking about it from an individual decision-making standpoint of understanding what drives you and how to invest your time for satisfaction and fulfillment from an individual perspective, absolutely, that's there's such power in doing that from an organizational perspective of what's a good return on investment in terms of how should you as a company be investing your resources, and is it going to play out to not only be worthwhile, but also a source of satisfaction and fulfillment.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us at Parker Seminars.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been a treat.
So you've been listening to Dr. Cassie Holmes, and this is Parker University.